Thanks for listening to the Intersections in Learning and Development cast, a series from the training, learning, and development community. My name is Monique St. Paul, and this cast focuses on forging relationships that foster effective learning no matter where you start. Whether you design, develop, deliver, support, or consult, and/or all of the above, we hope to provide you with new ideas, inspiration, and connections across the L&D community. Jonathan Peters is a Chief Motivation Officer at Sententia Gamification. He's spent over a decade studying the science and art of motivation and persuasion. In his role, he applies his knowledge and expertise to making learning more enticing, encouraging through gamification. We really wanted to talk to Jonathan because the intersection of gamifying learning is an important one for us to understand to engage learners and increase knowledge retention. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to Intersections in Learning and Development. My name is Monique St. Paul. Co-host Lisa Crockett is on the, I like to say ones and twos, but on the keyboards producing for us today. Our guest today is Jonathan Peters, who is the Chief Motivation Officer from Sententia Gamification. It's a developer of experiential learning experiences for more than 20 years. We really wanted to talk to Jonathan today because the intersection of gamification is an important one for us to understand learner engagement as well as increasing knowledge retention. So, without further ado, Jonathan, I'll let you give us a little bit of bio about what you do and who you are.
Okay, good. So yeah, with Sententia and at Sententia Gamification, we focus on gamification of adult learning experiences. So whether that's corporate, we do have a lot of higher ed that we work with. And so we have several different things that we work with. We have GamiCon, which is gamification conference, which comes up. And what else? Of course, we do design, and then we have 3 levels of certification as well. So certification in gamification design. I'm hearing a little bit of echo. Are you hearing that as
I
we speak?
don't. I hear almost just
Okay.
like water in
It's
the
just
background or something like that.
phone
Yeah.
setup today, I guess. All
Audio is
right.
fine, says the audience member, so
Good,
we're good.
good, good.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you, Luis. All right, we'll get into it. So, what does gamification mean to you?
So there's lots of different definitions of gamification, and but the simple one that we like to use is taking the mechanics and dynamics of games, so what makes games fun, and then applying it in a non-game context. So a purist would say that gamification is not a game. So, but we like to broaden the umbrella a little bit. So we do bring in some learning games and so on, but it doesn't necessarily feel like a game when it's gamified. So just taking what makes games fun and applying it in a non-game context, such as learning experiences. So,
Excellent. Excellent. So, can you describe the difference sort of between a learning game and what you're doing in terms of taking a learning experience and gamifying it?
yeah. So if you take, let's just take Jeopardy, for instance. So the game agency, for instance, they have the uh, legal rights to use Jeopardy and we work in the learning environment. So yeah, certainly we're resellers of theirs, but when you get in there, the learner goes in, it feels like a game. We know this is a game. It has the music and the wheels spinning and so on. So it might be a good for an assessment. Did learning happen? But gamification is more immersive inside of the experience. And so there's a full range of just throwing points, badges, leaderboards at something all the way up to a full immersive experience where the learning is happening all the way through. The mechanics are there all the way through, not just as an assessment at the end. So it doesn't have to even feel like a game, although we do mention that we call it the magic circle when a learner moves into game experience, they enter what's called the magic circle, so they accept the rules of the game. So it's subtle, but it's not. Oh, now we're playing a game. It's now we're in a learning experience that has these fun mechanics and throughout
Excellent. So, what type
the
of
experience.
projects have you gamified? So, you're talking about this a little bit. So, it doesn't have to seem like a game, but Are you doing how to do technical training, or is it soft skills? What type of learning are your learners learning?
Yeah. Soft skills seems to be where we've been hanging out recently. So leadership, what's in the past, what's been big is for onboarding.
Hmm.
So here's this one example that we always like to point to. One of our master craftsmen did for a very large company, and they had 80 hours of onboarding experience. So this customer service person comes in and they're just looking at the screen, just going click, 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 click. And so the company was losing people. People would be like, ugh, I'd rather work at Starbucks or Taco Bell than work here. And so by it was immersive, it had a narrative, it had a story. You're bringing someone back from Mars and so on. And then that, from an onboarding perspective, was much more successful in keeping engagement and keeping people going. So onboarding is a good space for it. On soft skills, I'm trying to think on the technical side if we've seen something. In the past, some cybersecurity
Hmm.
was something that we've seen. We chased it down. Yeah, team building. Certainly on team building. That's easy with gamification because we can take mechanics and bring people into a guild and then move them through a scenario. Would be good.
Excellent. And with everything going on with COVID, I'm sure some of this used to be in person, but now a lot of it might be online.
Yeah,
How did you make the switch to virtual, or has it always been part of like e-learning, or can you explain that a little bit?
yeah. So a lot of people have the assumption that gamification has to be an e-learning inside of that, and that's because of the programming, of course, because of the background of games. The so the founder of our company, Monica Cornetti, in the early days of the gamification discussion, she argued for low tech and no tech gamification because everybody else was out there. And again, we didn't have the tools that we do now. So we're going back 10 years or so. And the so that was her entree in, and so she even used the analogy of marijuana being the gateway drug. So you should start with low tech, get people addicted before you spend the money, put in the time to put it on an e-platform. So but on the other hand, for us, we were already in the space, in the e-learning space, because that's where you can get in the art and you can control the environment more, especially for outside clients. In our case, with clients, we look forward to going back to being
Uh,
in person. And so specifically in our programs, like I said, our certifications are gamified, and they were originally designed to be one-on-one, not one-on-one, but in person. And so made the shift, like we all had to virtual. And so a lot of those mechanics stayed in play. All we did is just like move it onto a platform like we are here. We use Zoom, but it's the piece there.
yeah, excellent. And so, do you face any challenges with people taking sort of gamification seriously when you talk to stakeholders? How do you convince them that this is the right way to go?
Yeah, one of our people, so they're team members, but they work for other companies. So large, he's going through it right now with a large pharmaceutical company, and they're moving out the word gamification and putting in intrinsic motivation. So
Okay.
they're getting some pressure from above, and so that's what oftentimes I'll stress the word motivation design, so that we could use that as well. But and so he calls them, instead of game mechanics, they're motivation mechanics or motivational mechanics. So he's
Okay.
changing the wording. So even though, and I'm okay with it because that's what ultimately doing is saying these are things that people find as fun and engaging. So we don't necessarily have to call it gamification. We can move it outside. So yeah, motivational design is the one that I've used. He's using intrinsic motivation, and I'm kind of, just because I nerd out on these things. So the science of using the word intrinsic, it doesn't necessarily work. So
Right.
performance mechanics, I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
like it. It's a little bit semantics, which is one of my favorite words,
Yeah.
but I do
Yeah.
I do like it. It means the same thing. If people are doing what they're supposed to, then that's all that matters. And to that
Yeah.
question, how do you show the data that it's working, that more people are engaged in onboarding? What do you show those stakeholders at the end of an experience with you?
Yeah. And so that's what's great about gamification. Instead of doing, lecture, lecture, test, lecture,
Hmm.
lecture, quiz, and then what we're really measuring is just short term memory, working memory. We don't know if it's going to be successful further out. With game mechanics, there's a lot of not certain game mechanics we can make sure that learning is happening in the moment. And so, because we can look at engagement rates and so on, and this is where now we need to engage in LMS, and so there's a little bit more technology to come in to showing engagement and application as we're progressing through. So with certain game mechanics that we can really measure that, so we can see that they are engaged in the material in the moment as progressing through, instead of waiting to the end for an assessment. Um, so that we can work those in. And like I said, now we're moving to, we need an LMS, we need to be able to track that they're,
Right.
and that they're working through the escape room or whatever we're doing. So we can see that they're having small victories along the way. To use an escape room, because they're popular right now,
Hmm.
you can measure that they're staying with the narrative and moving through the material without saying, and now for a quiz.
Right. Do
So,
you think it's then more like micro learning then?
in a sense, in that sense, yeah. So learning is happening micro. A lot of times we just think of micro as being just in time.
Hmm.
Uh, so I have 2 minutes here versus if we're gamifying a longer program, then like an hour, 2 hours, or whatever, then it's technically micro learning, but learning is happening in the micro.
In short
So,
bursts. I get it. I get it. And then another question for you. So, how do you weave your learning solution into existing learning cycles? So, we know you mentioned onboarding, but for something like team building, these people already know each other. They might be doing other team building exercises. How do you combine what you do with what they're already doing?
yeah, that's a good question. The struggle is always, because if you already have something that exists, how do you modify it in time?
Hmm.
Especially if people are used to it over here. And that's what happens internally. You need to do that quite a bit. It's difficult to patch on top of it, is what I would say. When we take some game mechanics and we just tap it on top of something that already exists, we run the risk of making it feel just tacked on, I guess, because it's not a
Right.
part of it. It's easier to take apart the elements and gamify it all the way through, and that's the ideal world. So
Gotcha.
we're chasing a big contract right now. Yeah, bolt on. It's been in a year in the making. This organization wants all of their learning programs to be gamified, and so that, of course, is taking an outside um, entity to do that, because the folks that they have on staff already in their L&D department, they're already busy.
Right,
So
right, right.
how can you dismantle everything that's here and then recreate from not from scratch, because the learning's there. It's just changing the experience. So yeah, like Kim was saying, that usually, just because of how life is, I mean, if you you need 3 more people on your team to be able
Usually
to
more.
do that. But it's just important to be careful of that feeling like, oh, now we have this on top of what we already had. So
Gotcha.
it's a difficult struggle,
Right.
reality versus ideal.
True, fair enough. You mentioned those busy L&D folks. So when you go in as a company, what who do you work with? What departments do you work with? Is it just L&D? Is it marketing? Who do you interact with to get a project going?
Yeah. As a company, on our main, I don't know if it's main, yeah, our main kind of push and so on is really to train, to help people, not train, they'll say, but help folks who are already in the field have an idea of here's how you can simplify it. In other
Mhm.
words, why should a company bring us in if they already have a team who just needs to learn our process? And so that's where we do most of our focus. Um, just kind of resource wise, we could only bring on a couple projects at any time of actual design. We much rather spread the word for professionals who are already out there, who are already working in the field, so that you can help your company. And it's just a better use of resources because there's already talent. Why hire us? Why hire us to hire designers when we already have designers? So why
Right.
not work with the team you already have as a company?
Excellent. I'm sure they like that too. Just cost wise, that
Yeah,
works a lot better.
yeah. And then we get to hang out with L&D people, which are pretty fun instead of trying to finagle
See that? Yes,
finagle
L&D
things.
people are lots of fun. I'm not biased by any means.
Yeah,
Um, can you describe your development process and how it may vary from project to project as you work with
yeah,
different organizations?
yeah. So our process was we have 5 levels and there's 30 stepping stones. There's 6, so it's quite involved. But I'd say what's the most different for us from other things, and our biggest focus is on the learner. So we actually create personas. So we use a broad learning program that's going across an organization. We usually create maybe 3 at the most learner personas and then design for them, for the persona. And so there's always outliers. And then that's where the game mechanics come in, is what would be fun for them. So to use the example of let's say like a leaderboard or something. Most people do not like leaderboards. There's only a specific motivation profile that likes leaderboards. Most people don't like them. So why would I use a leaderboard, even though I happen to like leaderboards because I'm extremely competitive? I can see who I need to sabotage in order to get up on the
See, we
leaderboard.
just sabotage.
So, but that's rare. So even if it's fun for me to be highly competitive, in this case, to make sure other people are losing, most of my learners don't find that as fun or interesting. It would not be engaging. So that's where we really focus on them, on the learners. And then there's always outliers. You can't design for everybody, and they'll make
Right.
their own fun. So you out there can't design for me because I'm so weird, but I'll add competition somehow.
I'm okay with
So
leaderboards as long as I'm
even
on
if it's
top.
just in
Yeah,
my head. So,
that's
yeah.
too funny. Um, so as you work with folks, like how do you break them into working with you? So do you do icebreakers to get the idea? Do you need to explain gamification? Do you think people understand it when you're working with their teams, or how do you broach
Yeah.
that, or how do you get them to believe in what you believe?
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch in our field. So there's 2 areas that we focus in. I'm hanging out a lot in the larger gamification discussion because that's my role on the research side for the company. And then, so for there, it really matured a few years ago. And it's interesting to see how it's moved. So, like India is very excited about what's going on in India, and then even Middle East right now in gamification. Um, at least in the L&D space here in the U.S., we're behind the curve quite a bit. We're still seeing where it's a new concept. People haven't really played inside of the game with gamification of learning, unlike other countries are doing throughout the world. So it's interesting that when we do our certifications, because especially our public ones where we don't know the folks coming in, so we'll
Mhm.
do a Likert scale of your experience. And so it's been a little more difficult because that's really, the gap is widening. So we'll have people who have actually implemented in the same room of people who've just heard the term
Yep.
and attended because they heard it and they said, well, what is this? And so it is interesting there. Hey, Karen, thanks for Lifesavers. .org. That's one of the ones we use. It's a great example of um, uh, immersive gamification. So that's one that's worth, if you click on that, go play sometime, give yourself 15 minutes, but also watch the failure state, because that's also important in games, is we learn through failure. And so that's a powerful lesson to learn from gamification.
Yeah. Do you see Kim's question is, are U.S. companies too cautious, both of spending money and use of anything fun that might be a risk or a liability?
Yeah, I'm not really sure where the resistance comes. It might be that whole, we're serious people doing serious work. We don't pay them to have fun. And then also the legacy, and I've started to use this. I'll be on a discussion later today. And my point there is looking at, it's almost generational. Children in the classroom today have a much different experience than I had. I
100%.
couldn't talk, had to be quiet, had to sit in the desk all day. Now their movement, they don't have desks and so on. So there's also that expectation. So I think there'll be some movement becoming more acceptable as we're moving into it, especially when we can consistently show that engagement is going on. So if you have just a regular black text on a white screen, read this and take a quiz, and then change isn't happening. If we can show how over time that the people are remembering and engaging and applying the information, now we can make an ROI claim to say, hey, as long as you've lost the productivity for that hour of training, why not make sure it actually works? That there is a resistance to it,
Makes
and
sense.
so on.
So I have a question that I'm introverted, and as you were talking just about classrooms today, they are very different from what I think, even though we're different ages, um, learn. So I'm an introvert. I like working with groups for a little bit. I don't like open concept. I need headphones to work by myself. So what do you say in terms of that for people as things start to open up and they start to become more interactive with others? What about those folks who are a little more introverted who want to just sort of sit on their own? Do you create something for them to do solo, or what's going on? And you might not have an answer for that, but it's something that
Yeah,
perked my interest.
yeah, and again, it's when we look at who's playing, who our learners are, and then so if we see, let's say 60% of the folks are like you, then we wouldn't want to force you into
Yeah.
guild work, teamwork, uh, where you're needing to stand up and share and talk.
Terrifying.
So we would want to have other mechanics, and then maybe the fun, the social part, or we could create side quests where those of us who want to interact and talk and stand up and share like we are here, then for those people, then they have the opportunity, but it's more of a side quest and not penalizing you for not playing in that that quest.
Right.
But you can still get through the information and learn without causing you to be uncomfortable and disengage with
Appreciate
people.
that. A little bit of safety there for me. So what is your favorite resource when you're doing your own skills development?
Resource. So we really draw for us the main our one of the things that we really stress is the narrative and the story, and because there's been a lot of research on learning and learning through story in the last 7 years, and so that's where we really start turning. And so it's fun to say Pixar is my good. So you start paying
Right.
attention to what are the story arcs that are successful, and so that's what's been fun on my side, because then we have an excuse to watch movies.
Yeah. Always a good thing. Do you listen to any podcast, or do you follow individuals that people might want to also follow if they were interested in
Yeah.
gamifying?
Yeah, so he's not really in gamification, but the first person that came to mind when you were saying that was Tim Slade
Hmm.
he has a good podcast, and especially for those of you working in e-learning. I'll be on a panel with him later today, and so that's why he jumps to mind
Of
quickly.
course. Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, and then all the way Carl Kopp, as Kapp, looks like Cap.
Hmm.
Carl Kopp, he's a colleague, and so he's has the advantage of being a professor, and so he has grad students he can work with as
Excellent.
well.
Excellent.
So good source. He has these co-author, and again, because he gets to co-author books, then there's a book coming out, uh, especially for those of you who are in large L&D teams, specifically his co-author works at Microsoft. And so I just finished reviewing the book for them. So it's going to be published soon. And don't ask me the title off the top of my
No, I
head.
won't. I won't. I'll ask you another, I guess, serious question, and then we'll get into learn a little bit more about you. So, what experiences best prepared you for the role that you have now?
Um, yeah, my we call them mess to success stories when in public speaking.
Hmm.
Uh, when I was a professor, was relatively popular as a professor, and then most of you don't know on the call here today that the older you get, the younger college students get. And so I signed up for a company to then deliver their training to business professionals so that I could be with people my own age. And what happened is I went out there because I took what was working in the classroom and assumed it was going to work in seminars, day-long seminars. And it was because I was such a failure. It was so bad, so boring for everybody, me included. And gamification wasn't around then, but that's when I got in touch with Monica Cornetti, because back then she was known as the activity queen. And so it was right away, how do I engage learners? In this case, using learning activities. Like I said, this predates gamification by a few years. I think it became a term in 2010,
Okay.
and my failure was in 2008. So,
2 years prior. That's okay.
yeah,
All right. Well,
yeah,
let's learn a little bit about you. What's the
yeah.
last song that you listened to?
My song,
Hmm.
good. Um, She said yesterday. what what was on? What was on? What were they playing? Let's think about that. That was yeah, because I was going old '80s yesterday, so I'd have to be some Bon Jovi or something was playing
Okay.
on
That's
Spotify
fine.
yesterday.
Yeah, trick question. You weren't expecting that. You just told us what you last read, but what was the last thing that you read for fun so that you weren't reviewing?
Say that again. I didn't hear that.
What was the last thing that you read for fun?
Oh, for fun, yeah. So I'm a big um, audiobooks person, so I'm walking around all the time with my headphones on. And so I just finished Devers. So I'm all about the you uh, stuff. So the Red Spectre. Let me see who's the author. Andrews and Wilson. Or what's been playing in my head when I'm cooking dinner and washing dishes. So, yeah, so I do fiction when I'm just moving around the house, and then nonfiction when I'm exercising or something. So, yeah,
Excellent, excellent. And then, what is your favorite form of entertainment? So you listen to podcasts. Is that the favorite thing to listen
yeah.
to? You listen talked about movies. What else is going on?
Yeah, I just do a lot of, television was supposed to be so bad for us, but now with streaming,
Go.
I just love it. So we just wrapped up, and it's the timing is very interesting, but Inventing Anna, I think it's on Netflix. We just
Okay.
finished that, and so it's a real case. I just read in the Times this morning that she's going to be deported to Germany. We've been holding her for forever, even after she was convicted and served time in prison. Then she had to be held. Now she's finally getting sent back to. But anyway, fascinating how this lady was able to manipulate the wealthy in New York City.
Lisa says it was binge
Fun. So
worthy. Okay.
yeah,
So we
it's
have some suggestions there on Netflix. What's the last PG thing you did that kept you up late at night?
oh, the end of the night. I guess just playing I was playing a video game recently. What was it? And that kept me going besides watching TV. So
Yeah.
I'd have to be a little transparent. Sometimes it's getting out and seeing people nowadays. So now that, and where I live, because the bars are, it's all outdoors and stuff, so it's fun to. I'm very sociable, so that's something that keeps me up late at night is talking to strangers.
I won't even dig into that one. And the last question that we always ask is, could your partner or best friend accurately describe what you do for a living?
Well, because we work together, but I think outside of the company, I would say no, and that's what's always interesting, just because the gamification is so much more than just putting in little points, badges, leaderboards, or making a game. And so most people who know me don't really understand, and most of them don't care to understand, I think. So, like, oh, you do that thing with games, right? So, like, well, it's a little bit more involved.
You're going to hear my timer going off, and that is food in the oven. However, I'm going to say join us on March 29th first. Thank you, Jonathan Peters, for being with us today. Lisa, if you don't mind dropping his LinkedIn information in the chat one more time. At 11 o'clock on the 29th, we're going to have Erin Chancellor, who's an instructional designer, and I will be behind the keyboard, and Lisa will be on cam. Other than that, thank you, Jonathan, for your time, and everyone for joining. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening, and if you find value in our content, please consider supporting TLDC with a membership. Go to thetldc.com/join to sign up and get access to hundreds of our recorded videos, free entry to all of our live virtual conferences and events, and more. Your support helps us continue to build community and share valuable resources for L&D professionals around the world. Thanks again for listening.